big weekend of football last weekend. Where did I still have the scores I wrote down. My Highlanders, after a good year, they're gone, baby. It doesn't take long. That's the thing about the playoffs. They're sudden. You lose, you're gone. After an 8-1 season, Floyd lost to Evansville North. New Albany lost to Castle, so those two are going to play this week. Bloomington South and North getting back together after number one North had taken down South earlier in the year. South, I guess they were still number 3, but they reversed the tables in the playoffs, and they beat North 44-31. You have an Evansville Rights and Memorial who will go on after beating Bedford North Lawrence and Jasper. But then a ton of games up in the Indianapolis metropolitan area. Pike over Avon in overtime. Lawrence North with the win. Center Grove with a big win. Hamilton Southeastern wins big. Fishers wins big. Westfield Cathedral is a decent game, or Carmel rather. Carmel going down, man. Noblesville, Zionsville, Cathedral with a huge win over North Central. But here's the game, and I haven't gotten to the big game. Ben Davis, I will. But Brebeuf Jesuit and Lebanon, 70-49.
Yeah.
I'm like, I saw that, and I'm like, wait a minute. The losing team had 49 points.
I know.
And lost by 21? That is insane.
Yeah, so I went over to I covered cross country state at Terre Haute on Saturday, and I saw their AD, Brebeuf's AD, Ted Hampton, and they actually had their boy Cameron Todd won the boys race of the cross country state, and I was just talking to him a little bit, and I was like, man, I saw your score. It's going to take me 3 hours to go through the stats because I haven't digested everything yet. But yeah, they're a team that, back-to-back weeks. If you notice last week, they beat Northview 55-50. So they're basically playing arena ball in the playoffs, and they've given up 600 yards in each of their wins in the sectional round. So it's been amazing, what they're just obviously they're an offensive team this year. The past couple of years, honestly, they've been really good defensively, but they've lost a lot of talent from those teams. And they made it to state a couple of years ago. They played Brady Allen from Gibson Southern and lost, but they were right there in the state finals. But this team's going to have to outscore people, obviously, and they have a really interesting game this week too against Mooresville, which I don't know if they'll be able to stop Mooresville, and I don't, and they're just going to have to kind of play the same way. But yeah, that was 70-49, and Lebanon had a kid, Caden Lark, who just had a huge game, and I put him up for our player of the week, even in a loss. I think he's the only player I put up with the loss, but he had huge numbers receiving, and he had 2 interceptions in that game. But yeah, Brebeuf's, it'll be fun to see what they do this week and moving forward, because obviously they can score a ton. They just can't stop anybody, and sort of the nature of the makeup of their team this year.
Yep. And then, of course, the big game, number 3, Ben Davis takes down number 1, Brownsburg, but that's just not the story. They were down 18 in the fourth quarter and scored 3 times to come back for that win. That had to be a madhouse.
It was, it was a emotional sort of turn of events. And, right when Brownsburg on the first play of the fourth quarter, they, Garrett Sherrill, who he went over 2,000 yards on the season, had a great season, and he 45-yard run on the first play of the fourth quarter. They go up 25-7. And I'm right in that moment. I'm like, I've seen, so I tweeted this out even. I was like, I've seen some crazy games here. This game's not over, but it feels like Ben Davis has to score on this next drive. And then it could get interesting, because honestly, the big thing to me was that Ben Davis, even though Sherrill had 167 yards, he had 2 long touchdown runs. Other than that, they were really holding him to, most of his carries were 0, 1, 2. He didn't break off those normal, 5, 6, 7, 8 yarders that he normally does. So I was like, if they can score here, it could get interesting. They go down, score, they get a 25-14 game. And then the big play, and I think the play that people will remember from this game is Mark Zachary's pick six. 2 plays later into Brownsburg's next drive, Mark Zachary returns it 20 yards for a touchdown. And then all of a sudden it's 25-21 and really, or 25-20. And Ben Davis still had 8.5 minutes left. So it kind of felt at that point, the way Brownsburg kind of walked off the field there and it's, shoulders down a little, heads down a little bit. It just felt like, this is a game now. And it was just a matter of time. Brownsburg had no first downs in the fourth quarter other than that touchdown run on the first play. That they couldn't grind out yards and even 1 or 2 first downs. So just really a stunning comeback. And Ben Davis, they got Nyland Brown back last week, who's going to Kent State. Very good linebacker, huge leader for that team. And, he was the one making those tackles on Sherrill to keep him from breaking off those mid-range, those 5, 6, 7, 8 yarders. And he was such a sure tackler. It made a huge difference. So it was, again, I wrote last week about seeding the tournament and this is kind of a prime example. I mean, that felt like a semi-state game. I'm not saying Ben Davis is going to state, because they still have some teams they're going to run into who are really good, like Cathedral or Lawrence North, or and then down the road probably Center Grove. So it's not a done deal, but that game should have been a regional or semi-state. I mean, I just don't understand still why we have 4 games last Friday of number 1 versus number 3. I mean, why are we doing it? There's a better way to do this tournament. Yes. It would take some work to sort of not take a sledgehammer to it, but you can't just keep the thing as it is now and just seed the sectionals. That's not enough change to me.
Well, even if they just do the 6A, I think that is something that they have to look at. And I don't care about you got to do it for us too. No, you don't. I'm sorry. Nope, you just don't. This is real life. And this is, it's just bigger. So do 6A. Maybe 5A, but I don't know about that. 6A is got to be seeded, man. For one, there are just a ton of good teams, and then it's kind of top heavy. At times it can get like the Big Ten is right now.
Well, and I think if you're going to do it, just do 5A and 6A. But I agree, like 6A. And I went out through last week and I kind of seeded it just by Sagarin. I mean, you don't have to go by Sagarin, but it's sort of a good, at least sort of a model of like what you could do. And then you could change it based off if you have a committee or whatever to figure it out. But when you go through and actually do it by Sagarin, I just seeded, I think the way to do it is you seed top 16 on the north or the 16 teams on the north, 16 in the south, and you seed those 1 through 16. And kind of the argument you hear is, they're going to travel. All this travel doesn't even come into really a fact. It doesn't change anything really. You already have HSC and Fishers going to Fort Wayne. You already have some, Jeffersonville doesn't have anybody to play. They're coming up to play, Center Grove or Columbus North or Franklin Central. So, travel to me, it's a moot point. You're already spread out. There's already only 32 teams. You're going to have some travel, but most of these teams are Central Indiana in 6A, and 5A is a little bit more spread out, but not a ton. So I think you could do it. And my point is like, just do a 2-year trial run. See what 5A and 6A looks like in a seeded bracket. See if it makes sense to do it this way. If no one likes it, then you could go back. But you're really not changing. You're not changing the travel at least, but I think you're going to end up with a more, just a better tournament. Is that the whole point to me, is to have a better tournament, have better games later. As it stands now, and I'm not going to name teams, but you have teams playing for sectional championships this week who have 1, 2, or 3 wins. And if they upset somebody, that's great, but they beat teams that have 1, 2, or 3 wins. So I don't, what did they really accomplish? They beat another team that's not very good. I say this as someone who played on a 1-8 team. We didn't deserve to have a voice in the tournament format, or, you're still including everybody. I mean, that's to me, that's great. You should do that. And I'm not saying I like some aspects of the blind draw. I think you could still blind draw. You could have a show. You could blind draw, even the smaller classes. You could do maybe even seed the top 2 in those 8-team sectionals and blind draw the rest of it. But you could also build in a show of like, here's how we're seeding these 2 tournaments. But I don't know. I said I was going to get off I'm not going to beat a dead horse. I haven't even talked about this really for the last 5 or 6 years, but it just kind of riled me up again last week, seeing all these 1 versus 3 games.